Alright, Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation dollar 2901. Okay, 2901.00. Scope is part of the chapters of the Department of Labor Acquisition, or the dollar. Part sets introductory information about the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, explains the relationship of the dollar to federal acquisition regulations, explains dollar's purpose, authority, applicability, exclusion, and issuance. 101. Purpose. This chapter contained with the dollar estimated within the FAR system as Title 48 Code Federal Regulation. The purpose of the dollar is to implement and supplement with the FAR's acquisition regulation in accordance with the FAR's subpart 1.3 and authority cited therein. There is not by itself a complete document must be used in conjunction with the Federal Acquisition Regulation. Authority. The Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation is issued pursuant to the authority of the Secretary of Labor, Title 5 U.S. Stand Code 301, Title 40 U.S. Stand Code 486C. Authority has been delegated to the Assistant Secretary of Administrative Management in accordance with the Federal Acquisition Regulation 1301D3. 2901-105 issuance, 2901-105-1 publication code arrangement. Dollar is published in the CFR as charged as Chapter 29, Title 48. Alright, 2901-105-2 arrangement regulation with the dollar implements with the FAR's regulation implementing subsection Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation number caption extent feasible same federal acquisition regulation subpart section and subsection being implemented except the subsection being implemented proceed with the 29 or 29 0, such there will also be 4 numbers to be left with the first decimal. For example, the Department of Labor Acquisition Implementation of Federal Acquisition Regulation 2101-2902-101. The Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation or dollar may have gaps in number scheme because of the Federal Acquisition Regulation rule may not require the Department of Labor Acquisition Regular implementation. 105. 3 copies of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation are published in Federal Registry or the CFR published for the Superintendent Document, Government Printing Office, Washington, D.C. 2042. Request should be reference of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, Chapter 28, Title 48. The Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation is available electronic on the Government Printing Office website. 2901-3 Agency Acquisition Regulations, 304 Agency Control Compliance Procedures, Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation under the direct oversight of the Department of Labor Senior Procurement Executive or designee, 4 deviations from Federal Acquisition Regulation in the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, individual deviations 403, individual deviations affect only one contract action except for the individual decisions referred to the FAR's Acquisition Regulation 1405E. And the SPE authorized as to approve the individual deviation of Federal Acquisition Regulation provisions FAR's 1403 or from Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation provisions. 2901-404 Class Deviation. Class deviations affect more than one contract action. The Department of Labor believes that it will require class deviation on a permanent basis. On a permanent basis, it will purpose a FAR's Acquisition Regulation revision per FAR's Acquisition Regulation 1404. The SPE is authorized to approve and process class deviations of Federal Acquisition Regulation or the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation unless FAR's 405E is applicable. Subchapter 2901-6 Career Development and Contracting Authority Responsibility, 602 Contracting Officers, 602-1 Authority. Only the Department of Labor contracting officers have the authority to administratively terminate contracts that make with the related determination found with the Department of Labor contracting officers may bind Department of Labor to obligations under the contracts only to the extent of the authority delegated to them. 602-70 Contract Clause. Contracting officers shall insert clauses in 2952-201-70 Contracting officer representing all solicitations and awards. Subpart 2901-7 The determination of finding signatory authority, except as shown in the applicable Federal Acquisition Regulations and Department of Labor Acquisition Regulations, or where prohibited by statute, the authority to assign and delegate signature authority for various determinations and findings resides with the SPE or their designee. Alright, 2900,000 scope. This chapter is referred to with the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, with the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, the part set forth in the introduction information about the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation. This part explained the relationship of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation to the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and explained the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation, purpose, authority, applicable, exclusion, and insurance issuances. Alright. 2902. In definition, words and terms. Definition of the definition of the following of the words and the terms of the subpart and the context in which they were used clearly requires different meaning, different definition prescribed with the particular part of the portion of the part. Head of the agency, also called the agency head, means the assistant secretary of the ministry of the management, except the Secretary of Labor, head of the agency. Acquisition actions, which may be the terms of the statute of delegation, must be performed specifically by the Secretary of Labor, the Inspector General with his head agency, in all cases the officer of the Inspector General. Head contracting authority means the official through his overall responsibility management the contracting activity defined in FARS 2101, where the contracting activities have more than one person duly appointed with the contracting officer by the senior procurement executive, in this case the office of the Office of the Inspector General, issued by the Inspector General or their designee. Each head of the agency may designate the head of contracting activity as appropriate with a responsible managing contract activity of the respective agency. Senior Procurement Officer, or SPE, is defined by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, meaning individual appointed pursuant to Title 41 U.S. Standard Code 1502C, who is responsible for the management direction of the acquisition system. The executive agency, including implementation of unique acquisition regulation standard with the executive agency of the Department of Labor, and the senior procurement executive is also chairperson, procurement officer of the Department of Labor, suspending a department official and its permanent principal executive responsible for the office of the senior procurement executive. Alright, 2903. Improper business practices, personal conflicts of interest. 2903.1 Safeguard Procurement Integrity. 104.1 Definition of Agency Ethical Office being the Solicitor of Labor and Associate Solicitor for Legal Counsel and other officials designated with the Solicitor of Labor. 2903.2 for the contractor gratitudes to government personnel reporting suspected violation gratitudes clause. Contractor gratitudes office for the government personnel are subject to restriction under the Title 5 CFR Part 2635. 2903.204 Treatment of violation, suspected violation of the FARS Subpart 3.2 within clause of FARS 52.2033. Gratitudes are reported to the Office of the Inspector General. The authority is to determine whether the violation gratitudes caused by the contract, its agent, and other representative has occurred with the appropriate remedies delegated with that head contracting authority. 2903.7 Avoiding and resigning contract. 703 Authority pursuant to FARS 703 and 703.705B. The authority to avoid and resign contracts is delegated with the senior procurement executive. Alright, Alright, 2904 Administrative Information Matters. 2904.7 Contractor Record Retention. 2904.703 Policy. 2904.703.70 Contract Clause. Contracting officer shall include insert of the clause of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952-204-70 the record of management requirement and solicitation contracts in which contractor H works with, otherwise handles federal records defined in subsection A of the clause of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952-204-70, regardless of the medium in which the record exists. Part 2905 Public Contracting Actions. Subpart 2905.2, synopsis of the proposed contract actions, 2905.202, exemptions. Assistant Secretary Administrative of the Management authorized to make the determination prescribed in the FARS 5202B, subject to the cancellation requirements therein. Part 2906, review, reserved. Alright, part 2907, acquisition planning. Alright, 2907.1, acquisition planning. 107.2, consolidation. Senior procurement executive shall make the determination approve of the consolidation per Federal Acquisition Regulation 107.2, 2907.108, additional requirements for the telecommunicating. 2907.108 and 70, contracting clause. Contracting officer shall insert with the clause the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952, 270, contracting personnel teleworker, all associate solicitation contract for service including construction services. 2908, reserved. 2009, contracting qualifications. Alright, 2909.3, first article, testing approval. The definition of the Department of Labor. The debarring official is a senior procurement executive of the Department of Labor, and the suspending official is a senior procurement executive. 2909.5 is organizational consult and conflict of interest. The Secretary of Labor delegates for the senior procurement executive the authority to waive the general rule proceeding with the FARS regulation of subpart 95, which application in a particular situation would not be in the government's best interest of the making a determination over the subpart of the senior procurement executive should consult with the office of the solicitor of the relevant head contracting activity must be requested with such waiver with the writing of the senior procurement executive who will consult with the agency head with respect to each of the waiver requests. Each request must include an analysis of the facts involved with the potential actual conflict of the nature, extent of the conflict, the included benefits and the costs of the government, specific with the contractors, of the granting request, explanation with the measure of the take of the whether to neutralize, mitigate the conflict, if any. 3. Identification provisions of the FARS acquisition regulations, subpart 95 is to be waived. 507. 70, subpart clause, contracting officer shall insert the clause with the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952, 209, 72 for the organizational conflict interest of the clause OCI 1, exclusion future agents contracts. All solicitation contract services include with the construction services, agricultural, engineering services, any other contract within the contractor officer with the deems the clause to be applicable. 2910, reserved. 2911, the describing agency's needs. 2911.002, policy. 2911.002.70, contracting clause according to the FARS acquisition regulation 11.002G and on 12.202E. 39.101D, with the contracting officer also insert the clause with the Department of Labor acquisition regulation 2952, 211.70, Internet Protocol version 6 clauses, and all solicitation awards acquiring information technology products or services that are expected to exceed with a micro purchase threshold. 2912, reserved. 2913 and 14, reserved. 2915, contracting of a negotiation. 2915.6, unsolicited proposals. Agency point of contact 604, Director of Strategy Administration with the Office of Secretary of Procurement Executive will be appointed with the contact received with the unsolicited proposal. The responsibility with the designated with the directed by the SNA. Strategy and Administration only with the Defendant Director of Strategy and Administration only with the cognitive of the contractor or officer with the authority to bind with the government accepting unsolicited proposals. The Officer of Senior Procurement Executive with the Director of Strategy Administration responsible with the handling unsolicited proposals, ensuring the unsolicited proposal with control evaluated safeguard with the disposal in accordance with the so far Federal Acquisition Regulation. Support 15.6, the Office of Senior Procurement Executive Director of the Strategy Administration may consider the unsolicited proposal the proposal remedies upcoming solicitations and procurement identified with the current annual acquisition plan. 2915-605 component content unsolicited proposal. The addition contents required with the FAR 6015-605 unsolicited proposal for research should contain commitment by offeror to include cost sharing or should represent significant cost saving to the Department of Labor. Alright, 2916 to 18 reserved. 2000 Part 2919 small business programs. Subpart 2919.2 policy, general policy, management of small disadvantaged business utilization program. Department of Labor is responsible for the program. All manager of the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization within the Office of Senior Procurement Executive. All the Department of Labor's acquisition officials are responsible for providing opportunities to small businesses and small disadvantaged of the Department of Labor acquisition compliance with the law of directives and federal acquisition regulations. Further information can be found on the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization website, currently accessible at www.dol.gov. Agencies, OA, SAM, Center Offices, Office Senior Procurement Executive / Office Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization or successor website. Alright, Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2920-23 to 23 reserved. Alright, 2924, Protection of Privacy and Freedom of Information. Subpart 2924.1, Protection of Individual Privacy. 103, Procedures. 103.7, the Contract Clause. Contracting Officers and Clause of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2915-22-470. Privacy Breach Notification Requirements. All solicitation contracts except solicitation contracts are solely for the acquisition of the commercial available off-shelf items. Alright, part 29 through 2925 through 2926 reserved. Part 2927 reserved. Part 2928 bonds and insurances. Subpart 2928.1 bond other financial protections. 2928.1066 furnishing information. Head contracting activity or designate performs functions outlined in FAR 28.1066C. Subpart 2928.2 sureties and other security for bonds. 2928.203 individual surety of the contractor officer must refer evidence for possible criminal or fraudulent activities by individual surety of the officer inspector general. Alright, parts 29, 29, 29 through 31 reserved. 2932 contracting financing. 2932 for advance payments of the commercial acquisitions. 408 application advance payments. F consulting with the senior procurement executive and head contracting authority may authorize advance payments without interest pursuant with the FAR's regulation. 32408. 2932.5 progress payments based on costs. 5012 unusual progress payments. After consulting with the senior procurement executive, head contracting authority may approve requests for unusual progress payments. 503. 6. Suspension production payments. Action contracting officer under the FAR's acquisition regulation 325036 requires approval in advance from the head contracting authority. Upon receipt approval from the head contracting authority, contractor officer will request contract finance office to suspend or reduce payments. 2932.7 contracting funding requirements. 703 703.70 contracting clause. Contract officer shall insert with the clause of the Department of Labor acquisition regulation 2952-232-70 limited to the government's obligation in all solicitation contract serviceable services. Subpart 2932.9 prompt payment. 908 contracting clauses. Contracting officer shall insert clause of the Department of Labor acquisition regulation 2952-232-71 submission invoice all solicitation contracts. Alright, 2933 protest disputes and appeals. 2933-1 protest general with the relevant contracting office of the Department of Labor responsible for the procurement protested filed with the U.S. Government Accounting Office for the consult with the Department of Labor, legal counsel, office of the solicitor with the author of the agency had done with the FARS 33102B determined the solicitation proposed or the award does not comply with the requirements of the law regulations designated with the head contracting authority. 103 protest for the agency. Relevant contracting officer will appoint with the contact agency level the protest. Upon receipt of the agency level the protest, the contractor officer immediately notify the director of strategy and administration within the office of senior procurement executive and the Office of Solicitor of the Protest, Office of Senior Procurement Executive, the Director of Strategy, Administrative, the Agency Protest Official, Protest of the General Accounting Office, Protest before Award Authority, relevant to the Head Contracting Authority under FARS 33104B, the Authorized Contractor under award with the agency receiver to notify with the Government Accounting Office of the protest filed directly with the Government Accounting Office if it's intelligible in accordance with the Officer Solicitor with the Head Contracting Authority, prepared with the written funding of the information required with the FARS 33104B1. Protests after the award authority, head contracting authority under the FARS 33104C, authorized contract performance agency to receive the notification of the GAO to the protest of the file with directly with the Government Accounting Office if non-intelligible in coordinating with the officer solicitor, head contracting authority prepares and provides with the Government Accounting Office with the written funding and within the information required with the FARS 33104C2. Notice of the Government Authority, Government Accounting Office for the authority of the head contracting office authority under FARS 33104G to report to the Government Accounting Office of the failure to implement with the Government Accounting Office the recommendation with respect with the solicitation for the contract or award and a proposed award of the contract 60 days after the receiving the Government Accounting Office the recommendation non-intelligible written notice required and considered and coordinated with the officer of the solicitor with the subpart 2933-2 with the dispute with the appeals 203 applicability authority for the agency headed action under the FARS subpart 33-2 with the subdelegate with the senior procurement executive 209 suspected fraudulent claims. Contract officer must refer all matters related to the suspected fraudulent claims by contractor under the condition of FARS 33-209 with the Office of Inspector General for further action investigation. 2933-212 the contracting officer disputes duties upon appeal. When notice of appeal, civilian board contractor appeals have been received, the contracting officer must be recovered the day of the mailing of the day of the receipt of the notice was not mailed. The contracting officer must also immediately notify the officer of the solicitor of the appeal. Contracting officer shall provide with the transmitted administrator or also file with the officer with the solicitor assist with the officer solicitor with the defense of the appeal of the related matters. Alright, 2934-36 reserved. 2937 service contracting. 2937-1 service contracting general. 110 solicitation provision contract clause. Contracting officers shall ensure that the clause of the Department of Labor 2952-37-7 the emergency continuation essential services and all soliciting contracts support essential functions identified with the agency continuity plans. Alright, Part 2938 reserved. Part 2939 acquisition information technology. 2939-2 information communication technology. 2939-270 contract clause. Contracting officer shall ensure that the clause of the Department of Labor 2952 239-70 section 508 requirements all solicitation contracts acquisition information communication technology to be used by the Department of Labor. Part 2940 to 2941 reserved. Part 2942 contracting administrative audited services. Contracting audited services 2942-1 101 contracting audited responsibility. Contracting officers shall ensure the clause of the Department of Labor acquisition regulation 2952-242 70 access to the contractor business system and all solicitation contractors include the covered contractor system, which system is owned by the operative of the contractor process that stores and transmit federal information. 2942-101 70 contractor clause. Contracting officer shall ensure the clause of the Department of Labor acquisition regulation 2952-242-71 Department of Labor the mandatory training requirement of the contractor employee all solicitation contract services include construction services. Alright, 2943, contract modifications, 1 general, 104 notification contractor change, 10470 contractor clause, contractor officer shall ensure the club of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952-243, 70 contractor obligation notified with the contractor officer with the request for the change of the contractor scope, contractor obligation costs, and all solicitation contracts. Alright, 2944 reserved. 2945 government property. 2945-1 general 10470 contract clause, contractor will share and serve with the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952-245, 70 contractor responsible to report for the government property and all solicitation contracts contained in far as Acquisition Regulation 52-245-1 government property, 105 contractors property management system compliance, 10570 contractor clause, contractor officer shall ensure with the clause of the Department of Labor Acquisition Regulation 2952-245-71. Assessing report requirements all solicitation contract acquisition common property or increased management tracking of the high value government assets. Alright, 2940-6251 reserved. Alright, 2952 solicitation provisions and contract clauses. Okay, this one's kind of long, and we'll look at 253. Part 2, 2953, 299 reserved, and we'll go back to 250, 2952, solicitation provisions, contract clause, and cut the tape there.